Hello and welcome to this new video. In the previous videos, we implemented the voice chat system for Teams on a dedicated server. In this video, we will start a new topic. It is the progression of the player in the game. In a real game, you may have to categorize players according to their levels or experiences. For example, to do a matchmaking according to the level of the player in the game, it allows him to play with players with similar expertise. Another use case: if your game consists of rewarding a player, then it will therefore be based on his progression, which allows him to unlock achievements and therefore to win coins or objects, for example. In this video, we will use the plugin to discover and display player stats. A stat is an object representing any statistical data you choose to track, for example, the number of times that a player has performed a certain action, a player's total number of victories or losses, etc. You can use stats to determine when to unlock achievements and to rank players in leaderboards. We will discover that in the next videos. To start, we will prepare the UI for this video as well as for the next two videos because achievements and leaderboards are things based on player stats. A stat is usually represented by a name and an aggregation type. The aggregation type specifies how the value of this stat is updated. We'll see that later. The player progression display must be in the lobby level. It is not an obligation, but for me it is the most convenient place. So I want to add a folder containing the player progression widgets in the lobby widgets folder. In this folder, create a widget that is used to display the player progress. In other words, stats, achievements, and leaderboards. You can make your UI as you want. For me, it is a tutorial of the subsystem backend and not a tutorial of UI design. The goal is therefore to explain the backend to you. Add a canvas panel. What I want to do in this widget is to create a navigation bar that allows the player to display the progress by clicking on tabs. Basically, there will be 3 tabs for stats, achievements, and leaderboards respectively. So add a border to create this navigation bar, then reset its offsets and anchor. I want to add an offset on its y-axis, because this widget will be displayed by a parent tab, so a tab of the lobby navigation bar. This avoids this border from hiding the lobby navigation bar. Add a horizontal box to this border. This box will contain the 3 tabs. Add a size box to this horizontal box. This box therefore represents the first tab, therefore the Stats tab. Add a border to this size box. Now add a button that makes this tab clickable, and that allows an action to be executed once clicked. Add a text that represents the tab. Now you just have to duplicate the size box to add the other two tabs. Once duplicated, you change the name of the button and its text. I want to add spacers between these size boxes. The navigation bar is now ready. I want to add a switcher widget that allows to switch between widgets when a tab is clicked. Once added, reset its anchor and offsets. I rename it because I want to add the widgets to this switcher dynamically. To allow the player to know which tab he is currently on, I want to copy the Set Active function of the lobby widget. As a reminder, this function allows you to change the color of the tab according to the current active widget of the switcher. Copy this function, then paste it into the Progress widget. Replace the buttons with the buttons of this widget. Pay attention to the order in which these buttons are displayed according to the switcher indices. As we have already done for the lobby widget, we will add the event on clicked for each button in order to update the active widget of the switcher as well as to call the function on each click. Each time a button is clicked, call the switcher node, set active widget index giving it the index of the corresponding widget, then call the set active function. To be able to display this widget in the lobby, we must add it in the main widget of the lobby. So I want to add a tab that represents the player progress and then add the progress widget in the switcher. Select a tab to duplicate. For me, I will add this new tab after the dedicated servers tab. Once duplicated, change the button name and its text. Select this new button, then add the on-clicked event. We have to add the widget to the switcher. As we did for the other tabs, we set the active widget, then we call the set active function. We need to update the function to add the button. I run a test to check the display. Everything works fine. I now want to proceed to the creation of the widget, which consists of displaying the stats of the players. I want to display the stats in a table. It will be the same process of displaying the sessions, so a widget which represents the table and a widget which represents the items of this table. In a new folder, duplicate an existing widgets of the sessions. I want to duplicate the widgets of the dedicated sessions. Once duplicated, rename these two widgets. Open the Player Stats widget. I want to fix the display first before proceeding to modify the table. In this table, I want to display three elements: the player name, the stat name, and the value associated with this stat. Rename the scroll box. I want to remove the canvas refresh because I am going to implement an automatic refresh system. Adjust the canvas size to align with the table. Go to the event graph and remove all implementation. Open Player Stat Item widget. We only want 3 elements, so delete the other size boxes. Rename texts according to the elements to be displayed. Go to the event graph, then delete the implementations. Go back to the Stats widget, then add items to test the display. In the stat item event graph, add a function that is used to update the content. The contents will be passed through the stats widget via editable variables, so add these variables. Update texts according to variables. We must call this function in the construct event of the widget. Now go to the event graph of the stats widget. This is where we have to use the plugin to get the stats from the backend of the online subsystem. Search for the stats subcategory of Easy OSS category to find the features that the plugin provides you regarding the stat interface. Basically, the Unreal Engine stats interface doesn't offer many features. There are 3 features that allow you to get the stats and thus update the player stats value. To get the stats, call the task query OSS player stats, which is used to contact the backend of the target OSS in order to get the stats and put them in the cache. This task takes as parameters the list of IDs of the players for which we want to obtain the stats and a list of the stat names to search. If this task is complete, then we can obtain the stats from the cache by calling the node getCached_OSS_player_stats. This node takes as parameter the ID of the player for which we are looking for the stats and it returns a structure containing the stats found. This structure contains the user ID associated with the stats found and a map containing the stat names values pairs. In the event construct of the widget, I want to define a timer which is used to execute this query every 2 seconds. Add a custom event which is used to execute the query, is therefore to refresh the UI. We need the list of player IDs. In this tutorial, I want to display the stats of the local player and his friends. I want to pass these IDs through the parent widget, so the progress widget. So create an editable variable that represents these players. In order to identify the names of the players, I want to define this variable as a map where the key is the user ID and the value is the player name. We need the list of stat names to query. It should be noted that the stats interface does not offer us a feature to get the stat names, so we have to define them in the widget. In a real game, you have to update your game if you have new stats to offer to the players, or have a third-party API that your code can query to get the stat names. Go to the dev portal to add a stat. In this example, I want to add a stat that represents the number of jumps made by the player. A very important note: in the case of EOS, you must define the name of the stat in capital letters, otherwise the query will fail. This is a special case of EOS, so a limitation on the OSS side and not on the plugin side. There are 4 types of aggregation. Some means that the value given to the stat during the update will be added to the current value of the stat. The latest takes the value given by the update. The min takes the min value between the current value of stat and the value of the update. The max does the inverse of min. It should be noted that creating an achievement that references a stat with the latest type is not supported by EOS. I will show you each case. For now, I want to create the stat with a sum type. Add the stat name to the list of stat names. Once the query is finished, I want to clear all children of the scroll box. Because this code will be called via a timer, I don't want to display an error message in case of failure. We need to get stats from cache for each player ID. We must create a widget item for each stat. We must find the value associated with each stat. Create a player stat item type widget for each stat. Get player name from target user's variable. It should be noted that the stat value will be an empty string if this player does not have a value for this stat yet. In other words, the player has not yet updated this stat. For this, I will display a 0 if the returned value is an empty string. Once the item widget is created, we add it to the scroll box. In the event construct, I will define a timer that is used to call the refresh event every 2 seconds. I choose 2 seconds because the refresh UI has latent nodes. You can also use an event dispatcher that tells you that a query has been performed to restart the query. In the progress widget, I will add the player stats widget to the switcher dynamically, so via the blueprint. We can add it directly via the designer, but the problem is that this widget has editable variables that we must pass via the blueprint, so it is more appropriate to do everything in the blueprint. In the construct event of the widget, I will implement the logic that is used to create and add the widgets to the switcher. Since we are displaying the stats of the local player and his friends, I will use the plugin to get his friends list. I recommend you to store the friends list in the game instance to avoid calling the backend every time. To keep things simple, I will do the query here. Remember that EOS does not require a list name during query, but it is useful to get this list from the cache. For each friend, I will get their ID and player name to pass them to the player stats widget. So I want to define the map to pass to the widget. Add the key value pairs where the key is the player ID and the value is the player name. Once the loop is finished, we add the key value pair of the local player. I will now create the player stats widget to add to the switcher. Pass target user's variable to widget. Add the widget to the switcher. I want to correct something in the player stats widget. In fact, we display 0 when the stat value is an empty string. The mistake I made is that I display it if the key value pair is not found. I will run a test to verify the implementation. And there you have it. We can clearly see the jump stat of the local player and his friends. The current value is 0 because it is an empty string returned. We will see how it changes when we update the stat. To update the stat, I will do this implementation in the master player controller. You can do it wherever you want. Add a custom event that runs on the client and is used to update a list of stats. To update a stat or a list of stats, call the easy OSS task, Update OSS Player Stats. This task takes as parameter an array of stats to update. I will add an event dispatcher that fires when this task completes successfully. I will not use this event in this tutorial. It is just to draw your attention that you must implement a retry system when a stats update fails. I will show you the contents of the stat to update structure. To update a stat, you need to provide its name, the update value which will be processed by the backend according to the aggregation type, and the stat modification type which must adapt with the aggregation type. You see similar names to aggregation type. Basically it's the same thing, except that the Unreal Engine stat interface defines them by similar names. Go to the Master Player Controller interface to add the function that is used to update the stats. This allows us to call the update process from any object. Implement the function by connecting the client update stats event. Don't forget to set event replication to owning client. To test the stats update, I will add a test button in the player stats widget. This button will call the player controller to update the jump stat of the local player when it is clicked. This is not the right place to do the update. It must be done in the character blueprint when the player performs a jump action. We move it to the right place once tested. Call the update process once the button is clicked. Give the name of the jump stat. I will put a value of 1. I leave the modification type to unknown, so the backend decides how to update the stat according to its definition. Run a test. We see that player 1 has a score of 0. Click on Update Stat and see what will happen. Here, the score is incremented at each update because the update value is 1 and the typical aggregation of the stat is sum. Now try to change the modification type to give a type other than sum, thus a type which does not match with the aggregation type of the stat. To better understand the update functionality, also change the update value. Restart the test. We see that the current value of the stat is 3. Try clicking on the update button and see what happens. Here, the update value was added with the current value. That means the backend ignores the modification type if it does not match with the aggregation type. Go to the dev portal to recreate the stat. The idea is to change the aggregation type. I will show you the max type. I will let you test the other types to understand the update functionality. Give a stat value greater than the current value, which is 23. Restart the test. Click the button and see what happens. Here the current value of 23 has been replaced by the value given during the update because 40 is greater than 23. I invite you to test with a smaller value to verify that the update does not replace the current value in this case. I want to recreate the stat to give it a sum type, because my idea is to increment the number of jumps at each jump of the character. I will call the process of updating this stat in the right place, so in the blueprint character when the jump button is clicked. You notice that when recreate the stat, its value is not impacted. It is because the backend always keeps its value for each player. You can reset a stat for a player from the dev portal. That's all for this video. I invite you to create several stats and test the update for each type of aggregation, as well as from several players to understand the process. See you in the next video.